Well, we were having so much fun making fun of some of the Detroit diesel sounds and whatnot that we just got carried away and lost track of time totally. So if you're watching this in the replay, this is always our little 20-second lead-in to give you guys some opportunity to watch some ads while we wait to get the show started. But having said that, we're past that 20-second lead-in. My name is Jason. I'm the car guy of the Car Guy Six-Fan Show. Welcome to tonight's show. Beside me, over whichever way my finger's not pointing, is my co-host.
I'm Grant Tommy. I'm straight six fan of this operation. So welcome everybody. We have an exciting show tonight. We're talking derelict car companies, and we kind of had a little bit of success last season, or I guess it was it last season, Jason,
No,
or was it
two seasons ago?
2 seasons ago. Talking AMC, the history of AMC cars. And so tonight we think it's kind of a spin-off of that, and we're really looking forward to that. But Jason, why don't you just take a look at who's joined us in the chat and kind of give some acknowledgement over there?
Yeah, so we look at the very top of the list there, and Ryan from Everything is Broken Garage is the first one in the chat. Turlo says he's not first, but thank you for coming anyway. We've also got Tom C. Welcome, Tom. He's in recovery. Takes time to watch our show, as well as Roy Marco, Joseph Poloski, and who else? We got Big Al showed up in the chat there somewhere as well. And everybody is still rolling in. Real World Garage, thanks for joining. And yeah, we're pretty excited to talk about tonight's show, because we've even said that at some point there's probably enough information to create another whole show to talk about each one of these vehicles, or each one of these companies. But at the end of the day, the idea is just to kind of give you a rough rundown or a quick rundown of the history, maybe what led to the demise of each of these companies. But are companies that are in most cases just simply forgotten about because obviously they don't exist anymore. They're all American companies. And but before we do that, before we get into tonight's show, I do want to take a quick second to let everybody know that after our show is done, we're not going to be as long tonight. We're not going to probably the full hour, but after our show is done, you guys can head over to Junker Clunkers for the after party. He's got a little live stream going on over there, so make sure that you hit that up. Grant, where are we going to start with tonight's show?
Well, tonight we're going to start, and as Jason mentioned, some of it will be history, some will just be fun factoids. You know, there's only so much you can cover when we're trying to hit 4 different independent automakers here tonight. Maybe even throw in a 5th one, but I think the best place to start is it's not really even its own. I mean, it is its own brand, but it's more of a division. So we start with Desoto. That's who we're going to start with, and Desoto was a Chrysler product. It was actually founded by Walter Chrysler himself. And originally it was supposed to be in that mid-price class. So it was supposed to compete with Studebaker, with Hudson, Willis, and Pontiac. And it was actually a notch below Dodge at the time when it was founded back in the late 20s. So, and right out of the gate, its first debut year. So it was founded in 28, but its first full model year, 1929. They set an all-time single model record for the Desoto 6s for producing 81,065 units in 1 year. And that was a record that stood all the way till the 60s when Ford introduced the Falcon. So kind of impressive for an offshoot brand, mid-size class, to just in year one be a success like that. So as you move on, though, it's one of those... starts in late 20s, but it only made its way to about 1961 when it kind of met its demise. But in between there were still some successes. Of course, in 1952, the world got its first big-time production Hemi, and it was only a 276 cubic inch V8 at the time. So I know our buddy over at Scott's Speed Shop, he's built 1 or 2 of these. He calls it a baby Hemi. So 276 cubic inches isn't much, but it's still a Hemi, right? So without Desoto, Chrysler wouldn't have known how to mass produce Hemis. So I always thought that was pretty cool. And they called it its nickname was the Fire Dome. I always thought that's kind of a cool name. But although that's maybe a pinnacle of their company in 1952, by 1957, they had experienced their second worst year of all times. And their sales were 60% lower than the year before, and so that was kind of the beginning of the end. And the sad part about it is, so DeSoto at this time, or in the 30s, actually Chrysler had flipped the position of Dodge and DeSoto, so DeSoto moved up into the little, almost to be like the Buick competitor. But Chrysler had so much parts on hand for DeSoto, like in their factory, that they ramped up production to try to use up as much parts as they could. But they basically stuck Plymouth dealers with like this inventory of a car that nobody really wanted in 1961. So kind of a sad end in like kind of a crappy, I don't know, way to manage a business at the end. But that's the story of DeSoto, and that's kind of where I'll cap it off for DeSoto, Jason.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a few little things in there too. Is that one thing that you can look at when you see these DeSotos is if you've never heard of DeSoto before, you can automatically look at these cars. Maybe not so much this one here, but you can look at these cars and you can see the Chrysler design coming through on the big fins like the 300s and Furies. And you look at these, the opening of the grille. It's just one of the things that a lot of manufacturers were going through in the in the mid to late 50s was trying to figure out where they stood in the market. And one of the things that Chrysler felt with DeSoto was to go from 1956, I believe, Grant, you can correct me if I'm wrong with the numbers, but I think they had over 110,000 vehicles produced in 1956. And in 57, they went clear down to something like 46 or 7,000. Like, what a hit that took.
Yeah.
What the biggest shame in the car company was that they held on. They tried to hold on for 4 more years after that and producing, and all that ended up happening was throwing together cars with what parts they had left to the final year with just over 3,000 vehicles manufactured. Before we get into talking about our next defunct brand, which is Studebaker. Now, some of you guys are going to argue whether this is the proper logo for Studebaker or not. I'm gonna tell you right now, it is not. Granted, they are famous for their S, but there were several different designs that they had. Before we go into that, again, we want to jump over to the chat, see if you guys have any questions and see what the comments are looking like. Grant, is there anything over there that we should be talking about that people are saying about the DeSotos?
Big L decided to show his age a little bit and made a comment that says, "When I was a kid, DeSoto was pretty popular. The V8 was pretty powerful." So it's pretty cool to have someone in the chat who remembers DeSotos roaming the streets, in their lifetime. So I can't say that for myself, but that's pretty cool.
So as we get into Studebaker, out of all 4 brands that we're going to talk about tonight, this is probably my favorite. One of the biggest reasons is why they're my favorite is because it started as a family company that had nothing, and they decided that they were going to make wagons, horse-drawn wagons, to go from being just a couple of brothers. I think there was 4 or 5 brothers altogether, but the 2 of them that started the manufacturing went from just one cart every so often. They put a cart out a week, and then it went into full production when they started getting government contracts to build, these things 10, 20, 100 at a time for the different things that the war was, not the war, sorry, different things that the government was doing that they needed these things for. They saw a need in the very beginning of people heading west. Now, granted, these guys, started their careers with the Studebakers, with their wagons in Great Bend, Indiana. So when they moved their to bigger production, they were looking forward. They were seeing that the West was growing, that people were heading west, and the only way they had to get there was via either train or wagon. So, when they started putting their name on these wagons, these Studebaker wagons, they were heading west, and that's what helped grow the western part of the U.S. and how people got there. As the 20th century kind of changed into automotive production, these guys jumped on board with that. They decided it was time to do the same thing as Henry Ford was doing, is looking forward to say, we can build a car that can compete with Henry Ford. We can build a car that's more comfortable, that's maybe more stylish, or that we're producing everything that we can. and we're standing behind it. We want to make it a good quality car. So the brothers of Studebaker decided that they were going to go into full production. And yes, I was right. There was 5 brothers, because I'm just kind of looking at my cheat sheet here. And they blew this company up into a competitive market, where by the time after the war, the Second World War, they decided, where are we going to go with this? Because they really only had one vehicle that they started producing, aside from everything they did for the war efforts. But as they grew into other cars, you started getting into different products and competition. And some of the bigwigs, after the brothers had kind of come and gone, didn't want to jump into a competitive market and compete with things like, Chrysler with their smaller cars or anything like that. So it was really tough for them to say, I want to strip down and go to of course, the Lark was their economy car, and get into that sort of thing. So they kept the motto of, do more than, or, produce more than you can promise. And they did that right through to the bitter end. And one of the biggest things with the demise of the company was their inability to streamline and keep up with the other manufacturers, the big 3 at the time. These guys went into the early 60s as well, just like Desoto did. And when that time was rolling around, they were the 4th biggest manufacturer of vehicles in the world at one time. And, that's compared to Chrysler, Dodge, and Ford in the US. So just because they're up there and they're big, they've also got to change with the times. And that was their demise, to not being able to move forward through the 60s, was being able to streamline, cut costs, compete with the likes of the other big 3 in the US at the time. So we're scrolling through what this was kind of their last strike at the fire. Here was the Avanti. I was telling Grant before we went live that this is probably the ugliest, best looking car ever made. It's very unique, but I think that if Studebaker had been allowed, or had been able to fine tune and refine this, we'd still have one of the best looking cars on the road today if they were still around. So the inability to jump in and compete and and cut costs and downsize a little bit, trim the fat, so to speak, was what kept Studebaker from moving forward through the 60s into the 70s.
Well, and really, like, you can roll back a little bit further. Like, we found this same to be true with Hudson and Nash when we did the AMC history. Was it really is all of these small motor companies trying to deal with coming out of the post-war era. Like, they had government contracts, and some manufacturers got bigger ones than others, and then it became really tough for them to retool, like to afford to retool and redesign things, and then keep up with the big automotive manufacturers like Ford and Dodge and Chevy, of course, or General Motors, if you will. So really, most of the time you can trace back to about post-war time as the beginning of the end. But Jason, I know you're kind of rolling through images here, so I'll let you pick back up there.
Yeah. So one of the things that they did too, with part of their war effort, was, in the Second World War, was to produce trucks. And so they were building military vehicles and some light tracked vehicles. This was one of the products that rolled out of that. Obviously, again, not a very stylish pickup truck, but nevertheless, it was Studebaker, and they were fulfilling that need for a light duty farm truck that was out there in the market. One of the neat things that I learned about, doing some studying on these guys was, like, if we go back to this car here, which I believe is a Commander. You guys can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But throughout most of their line, they tried to cut costs by reusing a lot of the same parts. So, things, like they do today. So door handles, window cranks, even to the point of roof stamping. Was very similar on every model car. So even though the car itself was different, the roof stamping was the same on several different models. So that was one way that they did cut costs. But unfortunately, like I said before, as the 60s rolled around, They couldn't keep up with the ideas of retooling and creating more dies and refitting their production lines to keep up with demand.
Just wanted to give a shout out to Nick Panaritis is in the chat with us. So it's always great having him. I know he's a historian in his own right, and so it's always good having him. But then some other house cleaning items while we're at it is just the reminder of Jason and I do keep track of the super chats that come in throughout the year, and we make sure we have inventory of that. So when we look back over the season, we can do something special with that. But the last thing, it seemed like there was, so Jason got one of the slides a little out of position.
Oh, crap. Did I?
It's okay. But he had thrown in there, it was actually a 53 Packard Clipper. And the only reason we wrap up talking about Studebaker, and when I talked about the post-war times, Hudson and Nash equals AMC eventually. It was interesting because around this time, there was talks of Studebaker, Packard, Nash, and Hudson all forming one manufacturer, but the leadership just never could line up in the way, and some deaths happened that Studebaker and Packard eventually merge, and then Hudson and Nash become AMC, and so Packard's history is a little bit tied to Studebaker's, and so just some real quick facts of them. As far back as 1916, they were thinking of merging with Nash. But their leadership, James Alvin Macaulay, was president for 40 years. And so I thought that was really interesting because when Jason and I studied the Hudson and Nash stuff, especially AMC, it was always just like this with leadership, up and down and up and down. So to have someone at the helm for 40 years was quite impressive. And so one historian said the richest people always in town always had a Packard. And so it was a luxury car. They were the first ones to say, one inline six is cool, but what happens if we slam two inline sixes together? And they introduced the twin six, which eventually became a motor for or an engine for the Liberty aircraft in World War I. And then what I think is another interesting piece, and this is probably like the last tidbit or I guess I got two left for Packard, but first company to build their own testing grounds. It was a $1 million facility back in 1928, 348 acres. And they say the old wives' tale is that they banked the circle track so well that you could take your hand off the steering wheel and just let it like guide itself into the turn because of how well they banked it. But so I thought that was interesting. And then actually their quality control was such high that during World War II, all the generals' cars were Packard Clippers, and they were painted all olive drab, of course. But even Rolls-Royce, who was producing motors for the British Air Force, took note and was asking for like their machinists' help to like how to produce parts because they were such high quality manufacturers, and even Russia as well in World War II. But anyway, there's my spiel on Packard. Jason, I'll let you take it back.
Yeah, no worries. And that is, you brought up that point about them being reliable vehicles, and that's one thing that when all the Studebaker vehicles went over to World War II overseas in Europe, the Germans got a hold of these things and they studied them and they realized just how industrial and how durable and reliable they were compared to the Mercedes counterparts that were being made at the time. And so that's something to be said for an American company. We've talked about it before with, cars that were made to fall apart today, whereas years ago they were made to last. And that's something to be said for Studebaker. Like I said before, had they been able to adapt and still be around today, my guess is that they would be giving the big three a huge run for their money.
Well, and just to wrap up that conversation, this whole episode's spawned off the AMC one, and it does just make me wonder, as you talk about quality from both Studebaker and the Packard side of things, like what if or what would have happened if the four of them would have merged? Because obviously we talked how we were actually impressed AMC lasted as long as it did because their leadership was so rocky. But both of these two, it seemed like kind of had their shit together, for the lack of a better term. So makes you kind of wonder what would have happened if all four of them would have merged.
And before I forget, I want to thank Turlo's Garage for the $1.99 super chat. Thank you very much. We will be keeping track of that. So I've made notes. So don't think that we're going to forget about that. Any great questions or topics in the chat before we move on to Checker?
No, not that I've seen, but I haven't been on top of it because I kind of was on my soapbox there for a second.
Yeah, no worries. So we want to jump into the Checker Cab Company. And one of the great things that I like about the Checker Cab, I'm going to pop this picture up here just because we all know exactly what the Checker Cab looks like. And they ran this particular body style for several years with very, very minimal changes. And one thing that Checker is known for, obviously, is their taxis. And the taxi company was based out of Chicago. And that's one of the things that they often felt that was a need for, was public transportation, the ability to get people who maybe couldn't afford cars or couldn't get from point A to point B, was to do this. So one man decided it was time to create this company, and he called it the Checker Cab Company. And even way back in the early times, when before they were even kind of putting vehicles in mass production, Checker was taking their own approach to building vehicles that would house or that would seat more than just, your standard 5 or 6 passenger. So if you look at this particular cab, one of the things that they have, I should have put a picture in there, was they had a bench seat in the back, and they, in most cases, had jumper seats in the middle as well. If you notice how long that wheelbase is, there was enough room for people to sit facing each other in that back section. But this is basically the Checker Marathon. It was a vehicle that was produced, like I said, for very many years under the same look of vehicle. Now, Checker itself has been around since the 30s, and the particularly Checker cab that you're looking at there was something that came around in the 50s, and they made it right up into the 80s. The very last model that rolled off the assembly line, I believe, if my memory serves me, was something like 1981 or 1982. And the Checker Cab Company themselves stayed around into the 2000s, and people don't realize that. But what they were doing was, because they had the manufacturing ability to produce their own vehicles, when they just couldn't keep up with safety standards as the 80s rolled around and emission standards, they said, well, we're going to stop making the car, but we're going to keep producing pieces to go for other vehicles. So they stayed in the automotive production for quite a long time, and making parts for other manufacturers because they already had that set up. So they've been around for quite a while. One of the neat facts, and I'm going to put that other picture up here, is the Checker basically only ever had one brand of car, and it was the Marathon. So you have the yellow Checker cab, as we saw in the beginning, and then you have the Marathon, which was basically the civilian or the public Checker that you could buy at the Checker dealer. Basically the same car. There was kind of no frills, and remained unchanged over almost 30 years. One of the neat tidbits of information was that I came across that Checker Cab Company was the only manufacturer ever, and still to date, to mass produce on an assembly line a limousine. This particular Marathon is an 8-door, and you could order it from the base 4-door to a 6-door to an 8-door, and a lot of them were used for airport shuttles from hotels to the airport and such. There's still a few of these around. You see them all over the interweb, everywhere, that people are trying to restore these things and put modern motors. And of course, I've seen some with LSs in them, and not just the limousines, but the regular Marathons and whatnot. Like I said, because it remained unchanged, they really got stale over the years. And because they were such a small manufacturing and such a niche market for the taxis, it was one of the things, like we said about Studebaker, they just could not adapt to the ever-changing demands of what the world wanted, and what the EPA was asking for, and what safety standards were being asked of. It was going to cost them several millions of dollars to revamp their platform that had shown such great success in the taxi business for so many years, that they just decided, you know what, it's time to stop manufacturing the car itself, We'll keep manufacturing auto parts and we'll move on. So the Checker Cab Company stayed around until the early 80s as far as vehicle manufacturing goes, and they were around till the 2000s producing car parts for other manufacturers.
Yeah, in Harnet's garage, I mentioned something very akin to that. That Studebaker got pieces from Checker to make the Borg-Warner 3-speed auto behind Chevy engines for 65 to 66 because Studebaker ran out of their own engines in 1964. So, yeah, it is always kind of cool too. The other, when we talked about the merger talk there a second ago, is the other thing is when you study the automotive history and you realize how tightly knit that community is and how someone worked for someone at 15 years ago at this company, but now is the president of that company 15 years later. It's always fascinating to me for sure. And Jason, I look at these images and it makes me wonder, and I may have actually speculated to answer my own question on this one, but I've always wondered what happened between 1956 or 57 and 58 model years where everybody decided they absolutely had to have 2 headlights on everything. And I'm wondering if did the government create a rule for high beam, low beam or something that was their solution? I don't know why. I mean, I look at this car, I'm like, it had to be made in 1958 because it's got dual headlights. That's just always, the 57 to 58 Bel Air just doesn't look the same when you have 2 headlights. I don't know. I don't know if anybody in the chat knows that answer, but I wonder what gives.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that for sure, because I do know that back in the actually the 58 model, I think if I remember correctly, was the last year that they actually had the single headlight. So the model that we're looking at now, I'm not sure. I didn't mark down what actual year it was, whether it was this one or either of those two, but I think those ones were 70s models with the dual headlights. And so I'm not sure if there was a government crackdown on the dual headlight versus the single or what have you, because I know you go into the 70s and there's a lot of vehicles that still had the single round headlights or they had the dual stack, like my Chrysler Cordoba and the Monte Carlos and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure what the deal was with that, but you look at this car and if somebody said, what year is that car? And you're automatically going to look at that and say it's a 50s shoebox. Whether it was, if you don't know anything about cars, you're going to say, well, that's a 50s Ford, Chevy, something. But in fact, that particular one, I believe, was a 70s model.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like every manufacturer, everybody went from 1 to 2 headlights between 57 and 58. I mean,
yeah,
it's.
But yeah, as we move on to our last topic, and this is going to be a real interesting one because Grant and I were talking about this a little bit before we went live, is that here's a company that started off back in the late 1800s making implements for your horse-drawn plows and all this stuff, and as we move up into today, the company is still around in the form of Navistar, which is your tractor trailers and whatnot. Obviously not the same company per se, but the reason why we chose International Harvester was simply because of its automotive division and the fact that it was making pickup trucks and sport utilities back in the day. And that's the biggest reason why, and I'll put the first picture up here. Everybody knows the International Scout. They're pretty desirable, I think, as far as I'm concerned, as a great competitor to the Bronco. And in later years, the Blazers and Ram Chargers and whatnot. One of the big things about International that really got me when I was looking through it was obviously they started off with farming, but it wasn't always just farming that International had a hand in. We talked about it back in our AMC days with the mergers between Nash and all those guys. Was they were also into the appliance manufacturing, basically because they wanted to make products that they could stand behind and manufacture for their employees. Well, that led into being manufactured for the general public. So not only did you get International tractors and farm equipment, implements, stuff like that, they moved into truck manufacturing and then obviously to appliances and whatnot. So everybody kind of seemed to hit that You remember the name Calvinator? Well, that came from, I believe it was Nash, wasn't it, Grant? If you remember back that far.
Yeah, it was they merged at a time, and Kelvinator is more of an appliance company, but that was the again trying to double up on manufacturing capabilities.
Yeah. So back when everybody was trying to build everything, and again back when everything was made, in house in the U.S. So American made meant something. Made in the USA. It still means it today. That it was made with quality, or it was made with pride, and it was putting many people to work. One of the big things about international is that because they played a big part in farming across the U.S. and of course, Grant, you're right smack dab in the middle of the U.S. in Kansas there. So there's so much farming involved all across the U.S. and Canada that everybody knows that international is a staple when it comes to tractors or farm equipment. So when they got into the automotive industry and tried to compete with the likes of Ford and Dodge and Chevrolet or GM, it was great. And these are some of the vehicles that they really took off. And I told Grant earlier, I said, as ugly as those colors are, I really like those two colors together on this pickup truck. So obviously we had the Scout. We've got the I think back in this day, I can't remember what they called these for sure, or what series truck they were, because they changed so many times what they were calling their trucks. This might be an R series or an R100. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody in the chat that can tell me the difference. And then we've also got the Travelall based on that same vehicle, which is basically a kind of a ripoff of the Suburban. So they were in the heavy market trying to compete with everybody who was building vehicles at this time. Trying to be a family wagon like you see here, trying to support the farming community for use of light duty pickup trucks, and the off-road competitors for things like the Bronco and later on the Blazers. They had manufactured all their own engines right up until their demise of the pickups and SUVs, but they were big at their time, and one of the things that they tried to do is they tried to keep things very ho-hum and not very stylish. And we look back at when we talked about Checker, it was the same thing. They kept the same thing for so many years. Well, International did the same thing with their vehicles for such a long time. They would keep certain body panels the same. The runs of the certain things would look the same for so many years, but they were changing things like grills. And in the pickup trucks, you'll notice over the years they went from this kind of rounded look later on to, in the early years, they had sharp looks of almost of a reminiscent of Chrysler or Dodge in their D100s or swept lines and such. But nevertheless, today I look back and I can say that they were really good looking trucks or decent looking trucks, and it's a shame that they did not continue with their international line. It makes you wonder, where would they have gone had they developed into something today? Because we all know that the full-size truck market and even the small trucks now are kind of taking over, and the prices are going way up. The styling and the options are going way up. The comfort has gone way up, and there's such a high market for pickup trucks today that if International was still making trucks, what would they look like? And I know there's a few people out there, Sketch Monkey and some of those guys, that would I would love to see what their thoughts would be on some of these vehicles. Grant, anything you want to add to International?
Yeah, a number of things. Well, first off, you talked about some of the other channels when it comes to internationals. Of course, Puddin's Fab Shop always seems to stub his toe on an international. He can't throw a rock without finding one. But you're right, in the Midwest and in Canada and the High Plains, if you will, not only as farm equipment, but it's International is a staple when it comes to grain trucks. Like I would say, as late as, so my family gave up the family farm in 2005. And so, whatever that is, 17 years ago now, like even to that day, I would say 6 out of 10, or I guess that's bad math. That would be 3 out of 5 grain trucks at the elevator is we're internationals. I mean, it was rare to see somebody have something other than that. And the other thing is, I know we keep making parallels or draw parallels to the AMC episode, but it's because that's what inspired this one. But it's funny how much overlap there is from a cubic inch standpoint of motor size from AMC to International, but they're two totally separate engines. Both companies had a 304, I believe it was, and a 345. I think both companies, and there may be 320. Anyway, what's interesting about the International ones is, as I understand it, their castings, or however they cast the blocks, they're such a hardened steel that when it comes time to rebuild them, it's very rare that you ever have to bore them out. It's usually just a scuffing of the cylinder walls that needs to take place because of their cast iron was just something so ridiculous. Probably old plow boards, mold boards is what they were probably making it out. I don't know, I'm just making that up, but that's I kind of think a unique, interesting factoid about it. Now, I've never seen anyone have any sort of. I've never seen Engine Masters on Motor Trend do a International 345 build, and maybe somebody should drop that in the suggestion box. But from what I understand, it's extremely hard to get decent power numbers, horsepower numbers out of them without spending like tens of thousands of dollars. So we'll leave it at that.
Well, and again, we go right back to planned obsolescence, and you wonder why some of those manufacturing processes didn't last through the years. Was because if they built an engine that lasted for 100 years that never needed any maintenance, well, they would never sell any more trucks or never any more cars. So just like the light bulb, I not change the subject, but you make a light bulb that lasts forever. No one's going to buy light bulbs. There goes your resale after the sale. So let's you look into that and you say, okay, well, if we make an engine that when it does get refreshed, it needs basically zero work, just changing the gaskets and away you go. Then there was no resale after in the aftermarket or anything like that. So can you imagine what it would be like today if we had engines that just you didn't have to work on? Looking back at some of those things that everybody was talking about with, I have an International that just I didn't need to bore it out because the block is so tough. And I'm sure that had its challenges as well when it comes to working on them to some degree with maybe broken bolts. It was hard to work on or whatever, but nevertheless, we look at all four of these manufacturers: Desoto, Studebaker, Checker, and International Harvester. We can only surmise where they would be today had they had the ability to get the leadership they needed, the design, the ability to not downsize, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, you mean when just simplify the manufacturing, like models and stuff.
Yeah, and streamlining, I guess, is maybe what I was looking for, and to push them forward and say, okay, well, if we do this, we can be competitive without spending, millions of dollars at the time. And of course, we look at, what they were selling. Studebaker was selling their first horse-drawn carts at the time for like $175 American. So I don't know what that would be worth in today's dollars, but I'm sure that it was a pretty good chunk of change to build something like that and earn an honest living. I think that I would love to have seen every single one of these four companies move forward as time goes on. But as we've seen in our time back in 2009, when Ford and Chrysler and Dodge, they were all having some hard times. Some of them took bailouts. Some of them had to streamline really, really tight, like GM, and lose some of their brands like Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Saturn, Hummer. There might have been a couple of others in there that they just had to do away with totally just so they could stay afloat. And I think when you go back to the 50s and early 60s, when Desoto and Studebaker were having their same troubles, they were looking at that same thing. Do we streamline? Do we merge? Do we close up shop? What do we do? How do we move forward? And I think that those are some pretty tough decisions when you take a place like Studebaker was, what did I say? It was in South Bend, Indiana. That whole city was built around Studebaker.
In Notre Dame.
What's that?
In Notre Dame. That's South Bend, Indiana isn't where Notre Dame is, but
oh, so just having a city built around a manufacturing company that no longer exists. I was telling Grant that I was watching a documentary on it, and they said it was just up until probably about 7 or 8 years ago that some of the Studebaker buildings were still on the manufacturing acreage in that city. But the city tore it down, and they're creating a new industrial park. And some of the buildings were actually kept and refurbed. But it's funny that, we're sitting here now 30, 40, 50 years later talking about what could have been. And I think that had we been around back then and the technology that we have today, I think we would have seen a lot more product coming out of each of those manufacturers.
The only thing I want to kind of like wrap up the international talk with is when, as you were, or all these companies really, you're talking about how, Navistar really is kind of the only remaining semblance of any of these 4 or 5, since we threw Packard in there. Is that how cool would it be for like SEMA or something if Navistar commissioned like a retro style with the Bronco coming back, and then now Chevy's looking at making a Blazer equivalent, and we've seen renderings of like, hey, what would the Dodge one look like? How cool would it be for Navistar to just commission some builder to be like, hey, how would you retro style a Scout in 2022 or for SEMA? Like just do a one-off and just throw a gnarly Navistar diesel engine in it, and just, I just think that'd be so cool.
Yeah, and putting in some of today's technology into some of that build, whether it's a completely new build or you're taking an old International Scout and modernizing it, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes you look at today and you say, all these options that we have, can we get a no frills? Well, it's hard to get a no frills when safety and EPA emissions control just how much money the manufacturers have to spend on these vehicles when they're producing them. Excuse me.
Well, Jason, I know that's the end of the independent automaker talk we had planned for tonight. So we'll kind of wrap things up in traditional Car Guy 6 Fan Show fashion and talk a few things like any recent growth hacks or anything that you've come across, and then of course what upcoming content on our channels. And so I don't know if you have any new tidbits or things you've learned recently that you feel like have helped you gain an edge or something. But I will say I did take AK Strim's advice about TikTok and just do them and just narrate, like just tell people what's going on like you would in a YouTube video. And yeah, I've went from like 89 followers to like almost 300 now in the course of under 2 weeks. So I've seemed to have hit whatever that magic get swept up in that machine thing is. So it does work. But any growth hacks or anything you're currently kind of seeing or pursuing?
Well, just to piggyback on what you were saying is that's the difference between a YouTube algorithm and a TikTok algorithm. A TikTok algorithm works that you've got to make a video in order for people to see you. All right. So because you don't necessarily have to be subscribed or whatever for them to see you. Whereas YouTube, the algorithm is so different that you have to create your own presence, your own brand and everything like that. I think that if you're making a video and people see it, they'll want to see more, no matter what source of social media that you're on. Grant and I have both committed to doing a post a day on Instagram to make sure that we're getting something out there, that we're doing something for you guys. I think at least that was maybe one of the things that I had said I was going to do. But I guess the biggest growth hack is keep yourself out there. Let people know who you are. Let people see you. The more they see you, the more they're going to want to see you. The more they're going to want to learn about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what projects you might be working on, or just simply a little bit more about what you're talking about. So it's always good to make a post a day. If I can challenge anybody that's in the chat right now, make a post a day. I know there's a lot of you guys out there that do, because I see them all, but there's some of you that don't. So if that's the only growth hack that I have, is choose a piece of social media, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, whatever it is. Make a post a day get yourself out there. The more people see you, the more they're going to come find you elsewhere.
Yeah, visibility. And the other healthy reminder there is like, if you start to think about it as it's still free advertising. You're not paying anybody to put this stuff up. You're your own thing. And I missed one. It looks like 2 days already here in February. I've been keeping track on my calendar, and I know January. I think I missed 3 days total, but 2 of those were before I really committed to doing this. But yeah, no, I think it's good, and it's definitely still something I want to try to do. Is hopefully we're sitting here on New Year's Eve, and I said I've only missed 5 days all year, but we'll see. But it's still, if I didn't commit to it, it would have been more random than this, and so like honestly, like while I haven't hit that goal, it's still better than what it would have been without the motivation. So,
No, that's right.
Or I was just going to ask what's coming up on Old Car Guy, or what content shall we expect?
Well, I haven't done anything this week at all. It's been a very busy week at the shop. The last 2 weeks actually have been quite busy with car sales. I'm going to try and put together something to do with the shop because, as you guys know, if you drive by your car dealerships, your new car dealerships, you'd probably see a lot of them don't have much inventory. I've got 7 vehicles on my lot right now. The last couple of weeks, we've been selling a few and haven't been able to replace them because of the, I don't want to say because of the shortage. There's no shortage. It's just the quality of used cars that are available to us right now are very, very, let's say, indifferent. It's hard to find something that you really want that you don't want to overpay for. If you're going to buy stuff, you got to overpay for it. So yeah, the Panther exhaust video a couple days ago, that was something that I said, geez, we got 3 of those Panther cars. They all have different exhausts. Why not do a quick TikTok or a quick video and get you guys to it? So that I do have another one followed up, which is I'm actually going to be not just letting them idle. I'm going to rev them up so you guys can hear them. And so I don't have an actual full-length video yet. I'm not sure when I'm going to get that together. But yeah, we'll have some more Panther content coming real soon. Grant, how about you?
Well, as long as we're talking used car market, I don't really want to get too certain with what I'm about to unveil, but it does appear by this time on Saturday, the garage bay where Project Low Fairmont sits will be open again. And while I was planning on different content for the next upload, which reminder, it's every other week now, I'm guessing that's going to be, I'm guessing there will be a farewell video almost 2 weeks from today. So, but I'm really excited to where it's going. And I think I'll have good contact with the potential buyer where I can keep track of what happens to the car. Like, I think it's going to a good home. But again, it hasn't happened yet. So who knows? Like a number of things can happen and it could fall through. So who knows? But that's what I would, if I had to put money on it, I would think that that's what the next video is going to be about.
Well, there you go. So there's always something new happening between Grant and mine, our channels. There's always different things that we can be doing. I should have power, fingers crossed, in the garage this weekend. If that's the case, then I will have a video put together because I've been working on a kind of just something on the back burner with the lighting system. If you guys didn't see that YouTube short or TikTok I did with the new lights, you're going to want to watch that. Go back and see that. You get a pretty good idea of what's coming as far as lighting goes. We shouldn't have any problem with lights. I think that's all we've got, Grant, for this show for this Thursday evening on the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. Is there anything else you want to add before we get going?
Nothing I want to add myself, but there were a few questions that came in from the chat. 2 from Turlo's Garage and then 1 from Bandit. So Turlo wants to know how many followers am I up so far this month. He seems to care more about my subscribers than I do, honestly. 13 so that's barely more than 1 a day. Whatever, I don't like. And then he asked if I wanted to race him to see who gets to 10,000 first before the end of the year. If I'm being honest, again, my goal was doubling. I was at 3,300. I want to get to 6,600. And I know some people say don't put self limitations on yourself, but like honestly, doing a video every other week. Hey, that'd be great if it could, but I'm not gonna again, I don't know. I'm kind of done with that.
Well,
Wearing myself out with that stuff.
But we've said it before. If you're not making content, right, you don't know when that first or that one video that might just blow up can happen, right? That's the whole point. Is if you're not making content, people are going to see it. Simple as that. Jason, I like your new garage you got there. How's the Yugo? The Yugo is sitting in a snowbank currently. The last 2 weeks, actually last weekend and the weekend before, we've got over 2 feet of snow in just 2 storms. So it's we got lots going on. We had a pretty mild week this week. My driveway is just a glare of ice right now. We're supposed to get a little bit of rain tomorrow and Saturday. Hopefully get that stuff cleaned up. But thanks, guys, for being a part of the Car Guy Six Fan Show this Thursday evening. Next week, we are back. Hopefully, we're on Grant's channel. Maybe he can shed some light on that.
Knock on wood. Yeah, so I have a recruitment trip going on with work where we're heading up to. In fact, if anybody wants to plug the ear of Kevin from Junkyard Digs or Thunderhead 289, I will be in Ames, Iowa, and even our friends at Daily Driven Death Traps, I believe, are close by. So maybe they could come to my hotel room and be guest appearances on the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. But I may be in a hotel Thursday night in Ames, Iowa, or I may be driving down I-35 on Thursday night. So I don't quite know yet. So Jason and I haven't discussed if we should just go ahead and host it on his channel to be safe, or if I should gamble and try. Either way, just make sure you're following both of us on Instagram, whatever. We'll keep you in the loop. Whatever that solution is, we'll let you know.
Yeah, so we'll keep you in the loop. Our guest next week is Craig from Flying Wheels, and if you don't know who that is, look him up on YouTube. He's got a pretty good channel. He's doing lots of really cool stuff, and we're going to be talking about it next week. So whether it's on my channel or Grant's, Craig will still be here, and we'll follow up with where it's going to be. We'll make sure you guys understand that, so there's no loss. I'm going to sign off by saying so long. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Grant, why don't you go ahead and close us out?
Well, as always, I just wanted to say thanks to all my Six fans out there. Thanks for watching.